Okay, welcome back, everybody. This is our class, our second class on Sefer Shoftim. In Shnai Mikra, so the last 14 prakim since last week have been the second half of Sefer Shoftim and the beginning of Sefer Shmuel. I think we're up to chapter 8, which is actually perfect because our whole point of our series on Sefer Shoftim is I can't understand Sefer Shoftim if I don't know what's happening in the beginning of Sefer Shmuel. Because my whole point is that our Sefer Shoftim is composed and written in the time of Shmuel the Navi to explain to the people why God's allowing a king, even though they're asking for the wrong reasons, why God's giving king anyhow, even though Shmuel the prophet thinks it's a bad idea, at least a bad idea at this time, why God's telling him to do it anyhow. And so we're going to continue that approach, review that, and see how the last 5 chapters, which have nothing to do with the Shoftim, are become an integral part of the book in light of that. So I have a little source sheet here. Source sheet, just a outline of what we're going to do today. Here we go. Okay, what are we going to do first? We're going to the key point of Shoftim. So our whole point was that the prophetic issue that our book is dealing with is why Hashem agrees to people's request to establish a monarchy, even though they're asking for the wrong reasons. Well, and Shmuel has to clarify in the book why he was opposed, but why Hashem agreed. That was our topic last week. And Shmuel's job now is not to become the leader. He was the leader. Now he's going to give up his leadership to the king. He has to make sure that the people understand the potential gain of the king, the potential danger of the king, and he has to make sure the king goes in the right direction and the people go in the right direction together with the king. And basically, Shmuel's approach that you don't need a king, God disagreed with, you need a king, but thinking a king will solve all your problems isn't good either. You need both a king to lead the nation, to become a nation representing God, but you also need a king guided by a prophet who's going to make sure that he leads the king in the right direction. Now, what we did last week, let me just show that outline we did last week, is that wasn't it. Oh, here we go. Oh, this one right here. There's the outline that we did last week. Where are we? Here we go. This was the thesis we proved that we had the routine, the cycle. Am Yisrael left God, that God brought a trouble, they cried out to God, he sent a shofet for salvation after they prayed, and then there was quiet, and they left God again. And then he proves that with Otniel, Ehud, Devorah, and Gidon. We explained it can't be by chance that these are all 40 years or multiple 40 years, but everything's building up to Gidon, because the last time before the people asked for a king in the time of Shmuel, the last time the people had a consensus and wanted to establish a monarchy was with Gidon. When Gidon said no, the result was disastrous. We end up with Avimelech, which was the worst possible idea of a king. In fact, he named himself Avimelech. How he came into power, that was all a disaster. And then the stories of Yiftach and Shimshon, they're far from the ideal Shoftim compared to the first 4 Shoftim, Otniel, Ehud, Devorah, and Gidon. So that contrast in itself is part of the book. Today we're going to talk about the 3 stories at the end. I'll review what they are and try to see how they're going to give a lot of extra meaning to the book and why they're included. I'll just introduce my main point I want to make, is that a king is not going to solve all your problems, but a king has to make sure there's an educational system, and it's not enough to reform the political system you have. You need a king to run the country. You also need educational leadership. And the tribe that God set aside for educational leadership was Shevet Levi. And we're going to see in all these stories at the end of the book, Shevet Levi is a disaster. Basically, all the stories center around a Ish Levi who's causing trouble. And the whole section is full of sarcasm and irony, as we'll see. But bottom line, what Shmuel ends up doing in his lifetime, Shmuel's going to reform the educational system. He's going to be an Ish Levi who's going to become a Kohen and do things right. He's going to reform the Kohuna, Bnei Eli, the contrast with Bnei Eli. He's going to fix that corruption. He's going to reform the political leadership of the king. And he's also going to reform doing tshuva when he gathers the people mitzvah to do that big tshuva gathering in chapter 7. Hopefully we'll get there today as well. Okay, so to start, let's go back to our other source sheet. Here we go. One last thing. I want to show you why Sefer Shoftim is so fitting for the time period of Shmuel. Shmuel, we know, anoints Shaul, but Shaul is unanointed, and then he picks David. But Shmuel is David HaMelech's Rebbe. David HaMelech writes Sefer Tehillim, and there's a parak in Tehillim which is very parallel to the cycle in Sefer Shoftim, which we're all familiar with, I'm sure. Tehillim 107. We say it on Yom Ha'atzmaut. In Edot Mizrach, they say it every Erev Shabbat. But if you remember Tehillim 107, it's the source for Birchat HaGomel. The 4 times you bring Gomel for, when you recover from the illness, or when you travel through the seas, or you come out of jail, things like that, or traveling through the desert. So the Mizmor begins, Hodu Lashem ki tov t'lam chazdo, yemrugu le'Hashem v'shgal me'atzar. This is a praise of God, that people redeemed by God must have to say thank you. And then there's 4 cases of Tov Bamidbar, people lost in the desert, people in jail, Yishvei Choshech v'Tzal Mavet, people, people deathly ill, Evelim Miderech Bisham, who are on Igu, what they call it, the gates of death, critically ill, and people traveling in sea and big storm, etc., being saved. Now, in all these cases, what happens? There's a case of tzara, something goes wrong, followed by tza'aka, each time the same phrase, Vaytzakol Hashem, Vizakol Hashem, followed by, the tza'aka is followed by Yeshua, and then followed by Hodaya. So it's a very similar cycle that there's, and some of them begin with the sin, Evedim Miderech Bisham, or also Yoshvei Choshech v'Tzal Mavet, because Kimru Imrel. There's people did something wrong, they receive a punishment. In their punishment, they cry out to God. God sends a Yeshua, and they say thank you, and we have a reason for the thanks. So in what ways it's similar? If I go back to the to our cycle, not this cycle, this one here. In our cycle, there's the trouble crying out to God and salvation, just like before. But what replaces Vatishkot Haaretz? It replaces with Hodaya. You have the same cycle, but David, aware of that cycle, how does Am Yisrael get out of that cycle? David takes that cycle, instead of having Sheket afterwards when things are quiet, we have Hodaya, and learning from our mistakes and growing from them and acknowledging God and thanking God, and basically saying Hallel to make sure that cycle doesn't have to start again. And that was David's theme. And so you can see Tehillim 107, if Shmuel is David's Rebbe, and if Shmuel wrote Sefer Shoftim, it makes sense that David composed Tehillim 107. Someone had a question, real quick?
Yeah, is Gus synonymous with tshuva? Is that what you mean?
Start again?
Is the crying out synonymous with
Saku, yeah, that's always tshuva usually. Yeah, they cry out to God.
Yeah, okay.
Now, sometimes God shomei tzaka, even though, remember in the end of Perek Bet and Shemot, Am Yisrael cries out from their hardship, and God hears their cry. Hashem is shomei tzakat, God shomei tzaka, but we say in Mikra Bikurim, v'nitzakal Hashem elei avotenu, that we cried out to God. So it's best to cry out to God, but God will even hear the cry of the oppressed, even because God hears the cry of shomei tzaka. Here's the cry of oppression. Now, so I think that's another example that I can really appreciate Sefer Shoftim, when you realize it's written in the time period of Shmuel. Now, a couple other parallels. I hope people realize that Shmuel is a Levi. Do you know the source for that? I'll share with you the screen. How do we know that Shmuel is a Levi? From Divrei Hayamim. Is this Divrei Hayamim, I hope? Yeah. In Divrei Hayamim, I messed up here. I got to get my... How do I get my... I've got to get back to this thing. Something happened on my screen here. Here we go. Here we are. Okay, there we are. And there we go. Okay, now I got my screen back. Perek Vav in Divrei Hayamim Aleph. What are we told? We can make this a little smaller. Here we go. Here. Elo, what does it say here? Bnei Levi, Pasuk Yudchet. There's Pasuk Yudchet here. Veilu asher imid David yadei shir bebeit Hashem. From the time David brought their own to Yerushalayim, these are the Levim who sang, etc. And it says, by Elu amdim b'nehem, b'bnei Kati, Heman, etc., etc. And there's Heman, who is the son of Yoel, the son of Shmuel, okay, the son of Elkanah, the son of Yerocham, the son of Eliel, ben Toach, ben Suf, ben Elkanah, ben Machat, ben Amshi, etc. ben Asir ben Evasat ben Korach, ben Yitzhak ben Kat ben Levi ben Yisrael. So we see here Shmuel. Remember Shmuel, the first line of Sefer Shmuel. Shmuel has been the Ishachad ben Ephraim. His name was Elkanah ben Yerocham, ben Uliel and Toach and Sof. And there's a great grandfather Elkanah named as well. Basically, Shmuel is a great grandson of Korach. That's clear. And then we have Bnei Asaf. Remember, these are the Mizmarim and Tilim. And this matches Tilim. Bnei Guzan has a beautiful shir on this of how the Mizmarim and Tilim follow the Levim in Divrei Yamim. But Asaf is also, he's from Shevet Levi. He's from Gershon. And Asaf is from Bnei Korach. Now, I can stop that share and close that one up and stop the share. 1 second. Screen sharing is stopped. Okay, 1 second. That's good. Now, what I want to show you is a couple other parallels to show the connection between Shmuel and Sefer Shoftim. First of all, remember he's a great descendant of Korach. What did Korach want to do? Korach wanted to reform the Kahuna. He complained about the Kahuna. That's what Shmuel does. Korach wanted to do it for the wrong reasons. Shmuel's doing it for the right reasons. What else was there? Korach wants to reform the political leadership. He complains about Moshe's leadership. That's what Korach wants to do, but he does it the right way. So you can see that the things that Korach want to do for the wrong reason, Shmuel is doing for the right reason. And that's why we read the Haftarah for Korach is going to be from Shmuel Aleph Perek Zayin, where I'm not Shmuel Aleph Perek Zayin, from Perek Yud Bet, when Shaul is anointed king by Shmuel, but he gives his final speech, giving the background to Sefer Shoftim. Now, back to the other parallel. If I look at the first line, let me open up a regular Tanakh now. If I open up the first line of, we don't want this here. What happened here? Where's my Tanakh? Here we go. That's better. In Sefer Shoftim, look how Perek Tetzayin begins. How Perek Tetzayin. What do we have? Vayish Mahar Ephraim Ushmo Michiel. So we have an Ish from Har Ephraim, just like Sefer Shmuel begins. If I look in Sefer Shmuel, how does it begin? Vayish Echad Mirabtaim Sofim Bahar Ephraim. His name is Elkanah ben Yerocham ben Elihu ben Tochu ben Suf ben Ephrati. That's exactly Korach's great grandson. So Shmuel is a Levi, and he's living in Yerketei Ephraim, but he's a Levi because the Levi went to all the different tribes. And it's a story about his wife. Is Akarai doesn't have children, and she'll have a miraculous birth, but the child will be a Nazir from birth. Very similar to Sefer Shoftim, Perek Yud Gimel, I guess. Remember the story of Manoach. Okay, Vayish Echad Mitzorah Mishpach Dani Ushmo Manoach, etc. And then here again, the woman is Akara, and there'll be a miraculous birth. And what does God tell her? So here is a miraculous birth, assisted by God. She has a child. He's going to be Nazir from birth, and he's going to bring Yeshua from the Plishtim in a very roundabout way. The same thing is going to happen with Shmuel. He'll be a Nazir from birth, but he'll bring about Yeshua from the Plishtim in a much more positive way, together with education. Now, one other thing in Sefer Shoftim, here we go, in Perek Yud Tet, how does it begin? In Melech B'Yisrael, we'll go back to this phrase in a minute. Vayish Levi, Hagar B'Yerketei Ephraim, and he takes the Pilegesh, and that's the whole story of Pilegesh B'Giva. So also, there's a Levi in Har Ephraim, right, who starts the story with the Pilegesh in a very negative way, which leads to a terrible civil war and the famous story of Pilegesh B'Giva, where the people are acting like stone. But its story begins very similar to how Shmuel begins. It's called a contrasting parallel. So again, my assumption is that Sefer Shoftim was written in the time of Shmuel to explain why we need a king. It makes sense why I find all these parallels between Shmuel and events and characters in Sefer Shoftim. Now, I want to focus now on, where are we? Stop the share. I want to focus now on, here we have this one and today's class. Here we go. Shoftim, or this one. Here we go. Let's do it. So we talked about the pivotal point in the book. Okay, why do we need the last 5 chapters, and what makes them a unit? So first of all, what makes the 5 chapters a unit? There's the rephrase, it'll be the last line of the book. It'll be repeated at the introduction to each of the stories. But during this time period, there's no king, and people do whatever they want. There's sort of anarchy, especially educational anarchy, and we'll see that in the people's thing. And each story centers on Ish Levi not doing their job. Now, we talked about the parallels to Shmuel, Levi becoming Kohen. His mother makes him a meal, we'll see later on. Shmuel's birth contrasting to Shimshon, and both bring salvation from the Plishtim, and we talked about the opium psukim. Now, the rest of the story I want to talk about sort of the beautiful sarcasm in the stories. And that's what I want to dedicate the shir to. What happens when there's no educational leadership? So when there's no central government, people do what they want. Anyone wants to open up a shul can open up a shul, open up a shtibel. And people, they're sort of religious, but probably the best story of them all is when what happens with Pelegish B'Giva is a disaster. But the way that people relate to it is also a disaster. And the civil war that breaks out, and each side is sure that they're right, but everyone is basically a bunch of bullies and full of violence. That type of leadership, that type of behavior is a sign that they need not only political leadership, they also need educational leadership. And that's going to be the job of Shevet Levi, and that's what Shmuel is going to do. So let me just go through the stories now quickly and show you what I want to talk about as far as the sarcasm goes. So we're going to open up Sefer Shoftim. We'll start in Perek Tetzayin. A little short story. No, not Tetzayin, Tetzayin. Chapter 17. Okay. Again, there's Ish Echad from Har Ephraim. His name is Michiel. What's he tell his mother? I'll just summarize the story. His mother put away 1,100 shekel into the of silver into a little cookie jar. What happened? The son stole the money. When the mother saw her money was stolen that she hid away, she started swearing and cursing whoever took it. The son heard her mother swearing and cursing and got really scared. And what's he say? And he tells his mother, hey, that was me, don't worry. She's all scared because she was cursing her son. So he gives the money back to his mother. And the mother says, don't worry, I dedicated the money for God to sort of take away the curse. And I'm going to make a pesel and masecha. For who? For Hashem. That's not idol worship. It might be idol worship IDLE, but it's not idol worship IDOL. This lady believes in the God of Israel, but she wants to make a little shtibel. She wants to make a little place for people to pray to God. Right? She returns the money. So he gives the money back to his mother. She takes 200 to make the peso. And I guess the other 900, I guess I call it lawyer's fees or something. Maybe it gets embezzled. Either way, we have this peso in Michal's house. And so this Ish Micha made his own Beit Elohim, a house for God. We'll see people come there to visit. We'll see. It's like people come for food and for drink, and we'll see travelers come in a minute. He makes an ephod and trofim, right? And by Maleh et Yad Achad Mibanav Vayil Kohen. So one of his sons becomes the rabbi in this little shtibel. And what's the final line? Bim in Melech Bisto Isha Shabein Avyasa. There's no doubt we're bringing this story because it's typifying the anarchy, the educational anarchy, and the level of the people, how bad it is. It's the framework of people being religious, but being terribly immoral, even though they claim to be religious. Now, scene 2, there's a young man, a nar, from Beit Lechem Yehuda, from Yehuda family, but he's a Levite. And he's living there. Okay? And this guy goes, he's making the rounds, etc. He's wandering. Okay, there's not much stability to this Levite. He'll find what he finds. He goes to Ephraim. He finds Beit Micha. Let's not go. Everything almost like by chance. Okay, now, the second he finds Micha, everything is about money. Everything about my salary. I'm a Levite. Great person. I'm from Beit Lechem. This, city from Yehuda with a lot of yichus, with a lot of, I'm important. I'm looking for a place to live. Stay with me. You'll be my mentor, not my father, but my mentor, like Apamun Goim. You'll be a mentor for me, and you'll be the Kohen in my shul, in my little shtibel. Here's your salary, and you get clothing, and food and lodging, etc. And the Levi goes with him. Okay. V'yo halevi l'shevet at the ish. That sounds very similar to Moshe Rabbeinu, but in a sarcastic way. So this Levite stays with the man. V'yilo nar ki'achad mibanav. He becomes one of the family. And listen to the wording here. By malay micha et yad Levi, v'yilo hanar lekohen, havi bebet micha. So now he becomes sort of the rabbi of this little house of God. And what does Micha say? Remember the same guy who stole from his mother, who sets up this house for God, etc. It says, "Ata yadati ki yetiv Hashem li ki hayelich lahalevi kohen." It's all bashert. This is a sign from God. God loves me. This is great. Now I know that God will be good to me because I hired this Levi, and he's going great. He built himself his little shul. He has a priest, etc. He's got trofim. He's got all the things you need in the shul, and we'll see in a minute. Travelers come and stay by his house. Scene 3. What happens? Okay. Again, the same header. During that time, there's no king in Israel. And Shevet Dani is looking for Nachalah because they're being pressed by the Plishtim from the coastal plain. And remember, Shevet Yehuda gave them the buffer area between Har Yehuda and the Shvela. That's the area of Beit Shemesh. And they never got their Nachalah up north yet. They weren't able to conquer it in the time of Yeshua. They were staying, in the meantime, temporarily in the area of Beit Shemesh. So the people of Dan want to go send an exploration mission up north to try to capture Dan. See the parallel to the Shimshon story from the same place. They go to check out the Ragel to Aretz L'Chokra, and they say, let's go check out the land. They come to Har Ephraim, and on the way to check out up north, on their spy mission, their scouting mission, they're in Har Ephraim. They need a place to stay. They go to Beit Micha. Be'elinu sham. They get free board and lodging there. Hey, my Beit Micha. Hey, my Kirat Kol Anar Levi. Hey, they recognize. Oh, I know this Levite. He's been made the rounds by us also. He gets around this Levite. Okay, and then they ask the Levite a question. He's asking him a question basically. How'd you get here? Where they smell already? I have someone who can work with us. Someone just like them. They want a Kohen. If they're going to move their Shevet up north, they're going to need a shul. They're going to need a priest and everything because they have to have they need a rabbanut, they need a shul and everything. They need what they need. And therefore, they ask him questions, and they found a friend. And what's he tell them? Here's my salary, here's my conditions, and that's my job here. What's he planning, and what are they planning? They're going to come and steal everything and take him. Okay? Go ask God, are we going to be successful? And what's the Kohen tell them? They get a bracha from the Rebbe. He says, God will be with you, and they go on their way. So the 5 men go, they scout up Laish, up north, which later becomes Dan, and they decide to go and attack it. They go back home to their Shevet, and they come with their 600 men, I think, to go and conquer the area of Dan. They get to Har Ephraim, and on the way up north, despite even though Michal opened his house to them, what do? They come to Beit Micha, and look like a mafia. Look how they act like thugs. So the 5 men who were there before who know the place, they tell the brethren who with them, all the army men who are with them, okay, listen to the mafia type behavior. Okay? There's this great, all these things here, all these things we need for a shul. Ephod, trafim, a pesa, masecha, and as well as a kohen, and know what you need to do. Okay, and first by Yeshua Shama, ask him how he's doing. And 600 men, this honor guard, is standing with all their swords and everything, is standing outside the gate of the house. And what do? Listen to the detail, how the story is told. Listen to the sarcasm. לקחו את הפסל ואת האפוד ואת התרפים ואת המסכה, והכהן ניצב פתח שער, ו600 איש חגור כלי מלחמתו. The 600 men standing guard, these 5 guys come and they take everything out and steal everything in the house. Elu ba'u Beit Micha, again, they took the same things again. And the Kohen said, sort of sarcastically, Matem osim, what are you doing? Listen what 5 men tell the Kohen. Be quiet. We suggest you be quiet. V'lech imanu, come with us. and we'll give you a better job. You'll be a mentor for us, and you'll be our priest. You'll be our chief rabbi. Wouldn't you rather be the chief rabbi of the Shevet of Dan than working for some little guy in Har Ephraim? So the Kohen a great job. He takes their offer. Again, this is our religious leadership. Everything for money. Who cares about stealing, misappropriating, embezzling? The main thing is the position. And these are people coming to take a nachala, to conquer and set up a shevet, and conquer the land of Israel and set up their inheritance. And this is a nation supposed to represent God. Again, the whole list again. And he goes with them. And they're on their way out. And they put the children ahead of them. They're on their way out. And the people from Beit Micha see what happened. They catch up to them, say, what's going on? And they told Micha, okay. Where they tell Micha that they stole everything that Micha had. And they tell him, Micha, do you have a problem? Something wrong? Okay. So what's Micha say? You took my God and my Kohen and everything in my little shtibel. And I have nothing left. What do you mean? What is it to you? You know what? I suggest you should be quiet. If you see these men, they're angry people. You don't mess with them. Okay? You don't mess with these guys. Okay? Because they may come and burn down your house, etc. Make them angry. You're lucky you're still alive, basically. Be quiet, go back home. And sure enough, nothing they can do. He couldn't do anything. Basically, they bullied, they took everything from him. They took everything to Kohen, again, repeating everything they took. And they come to Laish, okay? They wipe out the city. This is how we conquer. Set up a nachala in the land of Israel. They burned down the city. No one saved these people who they conquered because it was far away from Sidon, etc. They built up the city. Vaikru Shema'ir Dan b'Shem Dan Avihem. Ashulad Yisrael v'Ulam Lai Shemir L'Rishona. Sounds just like Yaakov's dream in Beitel v'Ulam Lu Shemir L'Rishona. Again, it's sarcastically the exact opposite. Remember Beitel and Dan? In Yaakov's dream of Beitel, that was something great to build a real house for God. That was the ideal Beit Elohim. And here they're making this Beit Elohim is a total farce. And again, this is a polemic against the Mikdashim later in Beit El and Dan that European builds. But it became a Mikdash in Dan, and basically the whole place is full of corruption. And the people from Dan took this Pesel and they made this Mikdash. And this guy, Yonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe, that's the Ish Levi, we finally get his name. They were Kohanim, they were the rabbis for Shevet Dani until people were exiled later in Beit Rishon. Okay? Again, this whole thing is a polemic against the Mikdash in Dan. And then this Pesach was there the whole time when the real Beit Elohim was in Shiloh. This was an alternate up in Dan. But I hope I just pointed out all the details in the story here. It's showing you how rotten the people are. And what's so special about how rotten people are, it's all in the framework of wanting to have a temple, because we're God's people. You have to have a shul, you have to have a coin, you have to have symbols of God, etc. But the people's behavior, the stealing, the embezzlement, the bullying, etc., and they're all doing it, l'shem shamayim, and that's how they set up this settlement in the tribe of Dan. Now, the next story gets even worse. Another, chapter 19, starts again. There's an Ish Levi from Har Ephraim. He takes a Pilegesh, Mr. Perfect here. Here's our Levite. Pilegesh, he dumps his Pilegesh. His Pilegesh is cheating on him. Then she goes to Beit Lechem to bring him back. He gets to Beit Lechem, and every morning is another hotel breakfast. He's there for 3 days. They eat, they drink. It's party culture. On the 4th day, they get up in the morning to go, and the father-in-law tells him, knows all the parallels to the Abraham Avinu stories. They're all from Parsha Be'era, what we just read last week. Remember, it's just like this is like sort of the inverse of Hachnasat Orchim. Okay. Stay another day. So the guy gets up to leave, and he says, wait another day, and they wait another day. They wait the 5th day. And again, he says, have breakfast first, sit down, eat something. And sure enough, they finally leave after a big breakfast. They're on their way with the Pilegesh. And he says, hey, it's getting dark already. Stay another day. And then you go up tomorrow morning. And then he says, I want to get home already. So he goes, but he leaves late. And on the way to Har Ephraim, they're going from Beit Lechem to Har Ephraim. It should take probably it's like 8, 9, 10-hour walk. But they only get up to Yerushalayim on the way there. And they're passing Yerushalayim at the time. But that was a Jebusite city. It wasn't conquered yet. And they needed a place to stay. They needed a hotel. And what happens? They're up to Yavuz. And they need a place to stay for the night. And of course, his Nar tells him, might we stay here in Yerushalayim? He says, no, we're not going to go to an Ir Nachri. We're not going to go to a non-Jewish city. We're Jews. We don't go to a place like that. They're not from Bnei Israel. We're going to go to Giva. Giva is a little hill in Binyamin, a little north of, it's where Hussein was building a palace. It's in Pisgat Zeb, basically, on the road, on the way to Ramallah. We know exactly the site that then becomes Givat Shaul, and there's a nice site there you can go on to. Okay, so what's he say to his Nar? Let's go to either Ramah or Giva. That's near where Yirmiyahu hears Kol Barama Nishma, later in Sefer Yirmiyahu. The sun sets by Giva, and they sleep there. They're in Giva and Binyamin, and no one invites them in because they're from Ephraim. It's a case of lack of Haknasat Orchim again. Just like in the story of Lot. Just like in the story with Lot, no one invites them in. But there was one man, not from Binyamin, who happened to be a businessman from Har Ephraim, happened to be there. Okay, and he comes back, he's from Har Ephraim. Who gar b'giva? See the tension between the two Shvatim. Okay. And here again, the imagery from Parsha Vayera. Vaysad Navayar, et ha'ish ha'orech b'rchov ha'ir, v'yomer ish hazaken, ana telechu me'ayin tavo. So he sees this guy, and now listen how firm he is. V'yomer lev, ovrim anachnu v'beit lechem Yehuda ad Yaakov Ephraim. We're going from Beit Lechem to Har Ephraim, up from there. Ve'lech Beit Lechem Yehuda el Beit Hashem ani holech ve'nish maseh b'debaita. I'm on my way to Beit. I'm going to Shiloh, to God's house in Shiloh, to Beit Hashem. I'm Mr. Frum. I'm Mr. Religious. Okay, but no one's inviting me in. And he says, "Don't worry. I have my own food. I just need a place to sleep." Okay, and the priest tells him the Ish Zaken invites him in. No problems. Come with me. So at least he's doing something good. This Ish Zaken, but he brings him to his house. And the second he brings again, Hema mitibim libam, again over food all the time, eating and having party culture. And the people of the city now, just like in Stone, no guests allowed. They go to break down the door and they say, we want to know who these men are. We want to get to know them without going to the Stone story. But it's all the wording. The author of the story is assuming the Stone story in Parsha Vayera and Bereshit, and wants the reader to basically vomit to see how bad the behavior is. And again, we have this very similar story. So the person says, don't take my my guest. Instead, take my daughter instead. But the man says, don't take his daughter. He gives him his pilegesh. He went to get, so he sends his pilegesh out, and she's raped the whole night. Okay, and basically do what they want. So the people don't take his daughter. They take his pilegesh instead. He sends his pilegesh out. She's raped all night long. Of course, he doesn't stay up to wait for her. He goes to sleep. The Ish Levi, Mr. Frum. And the guy gets up in the morning, and then what happens? She fell in the middle of the night when she got back home, collapsed at the front of the door. And again, her so-called husband is sound asleep. No one waited up for her or anything like that. In the morning, he gets up, and she's lying there by the front door. He gives her a kick, remember? And guess what? She doesn't respond. The assumption is she probably died because no one opened the door for her. I know there's a whole discussion whether she was dead or not yet. The main thing is that they didn't care about her, and she's dead by the time the story's over. And he cuts her body into 12 different places. He sends out to all the tribes of Israel, saying what? Okay, anyone who sees this, how could such a thing be in the land? Now, Mr. Frum here, whose behavior's been a disaster, and all he cares about is food and eating, and running from place to place. All of a sudden, he comes Mr. Frum, and he's starting a civil war by cutting the body up into 12 pieces and sending it out to get everyone riled up. And the only time you have Achdut in all Sefer Shoftim is in the next story. Vayitzu kol bnei Yisrael v'tigal yidad ki ish achad midan ad Beersheba eretz hagilad el Hashem hamitzpah and they called Vaytatzu Ibnot Ta'am Kol Shiftei Yisrael. We finally have Achdu. We finally have unity. For what reason? To wipe out another tribe. So Bnei Binyamin see that they're coming to war against them, and Bnei Yisrael told them, turn over these men. And Ish Levi gives his whole speech how mean these people were. And says, we want, and people in Binyamin say we can make our own trials. Don't tell us what to do. And there's a whole fight over who gets to try them for what they did. And he tells the whole story what happened to his Pilegesh, etc. Okay, and then the people, the bullies from the other tribes, they come kolab kishachal lemor lo nelechi sholoa lo nashlish mibito. Okay, no one's going to leave until we wipe out Binyamin. And basically they take a giant army, they go to war against Binyamin, and of course they go to war. They ask God who's going to go to war first, and sure enough, they go to war, and even though they ask God, God's not happy with them, and I think in the 3 battles, some 65,000 people died. Not only the people from both sides died, and on top of that, the entire tribe of Binyamin is wiped out, except for, I think, 600 men. How many people were left? I think 600. The war goes on and on. Finally, on the 3rd battle, they do a little better tshuva. And then, when the war's over, how many people are left? I think 600. Okay. In the final battle, okay, that's the rest of the parak is the battle. But again, all this mass murder of everybody, all in the name of God. Okay, B'ish Yisrael Shavo Binyamin Ve'akum Leficharav Meir Mitom Bad Beima Kol Nimsan Gam Kol Nimtzot Shuchu Ba'esh. We just wiped out everything. Again, they could have negotiated, they could have tried them, they could have waited, but they're so full of anger, just a terrible civil war, and every side is sure they're right. Now what they realize, they kill all the women and children. But before they went to war, again, there's 600 men left, and what are you going to do with them? Oh, by the way, when everyone decided to go to war, they swore in mitzvah, anyone who didn't come to war, who didn't want to join this effort, we could do whatever we want to them. Okay? Okay. And now again, the next day, the morning, they bring a lot in shlamim, and Bnei Yisrael say, what are we going to do? We have 600 men who need wives, but we swore in mitzvah, no one will give their daughter to the people of Binyamin. But now, if they don't get married, the shevet will be gone. What are we going to do? So they have a great idea. The people in Mitzvah the people in Yavesh Gilad didn't come. So they go to Yavesh Gilad, wipe out the whole city, take just the women old enough for marriage, everyone else they killed, and they find 400 wives. Okay? Instead of, they wouldn't break a shvuah, chas v'shalom, they swore in God's name not to give their daughter, but to wipe out a whole city and kill all the men and women and children, except for the women who could be married, that was fine. But you see the mixed up values again in the story. It's comes shining through. Okay, and therefore, they got 400 women who weren't married yet, and they and they found 400 wives for 400 of the 600, but there's 200 left. Now what are we going to do? Now they have a new idea. We could have thought this before, of course. They said, we can't give our daughter, but if they're taken, that's something else. So there's a holiday in Shiloh, and they tell the other 200 men, just go grab a wife, when they're dancing in the fields in Shiloh, just like take a Sadie Hawkins type of day and go grab your wife. That's the famous story of what happened in Shiloh. And notice the only mention of Shiloh in the whole book is this terrible story of what happened to Binyamin. So that's how they got their 600 wives. Of course, they could have thought of this before they killed Yavesh Gilad to get the first 400. They could have got 600 this way, but no, they're not going to break a shvuah, and they're not going to. No, they got to get their anger out. So that's how the tribe of Binyamin was saved. Again, that's the tribe that later Shaul is going to come from. That's part of the irony as well. Each person goes back to the Nachala, and what's the great final line? Again, all these 5 stories will end with that. All these 5 stories are coming to emphasize how bad society is. Like the goal, I think, of the author here is to make the reader want to vomit about how bad society's become. What's the level of the people? Where are we? And we're attributing all this to a lack of a kingdom, meaning if there's no strong organized government, no one's going to run the education system. And I need a king not only for political leadership and to fight battles, I also need a king to make sure that the people are educated properly, that God's house is run properly, and not everyone opens up their own little shul and all people's values are totally out of proportion. And what's going to happen now is the end of Sefer Shoftim. This behavior is basically rock bottom. When the stories happen, the big argument, you could argue earlier or later, but the main thing, it's not about Shoftim, it's about how bad the education system is and how bad society is during the time of the Shoftim. And that's another reason we need political reform, we need religious reform, and that's exactly what Shmuel is going to do. So one last observation, and then we'll see if there's any questions. Last observation is as follows. At the end of Sefer Shoftim, beginning of Sefer Shmuel, we reach rock bottom. The Plishtim were coming in from the coastal plain. We have trouble with Ammon and Moab. Our borders are shrinking. Things are going really bad. Our education system is a disaster. Shevet Levi is a disaster. Our leadership, basically, the last leader was Shimshon. That's not even a leader. Basically, everything's falling apart. The rabbinate we'll see is totally corrupt with the sons of Eli. Within 50 years' time, everything turns around and we get Malchut David. We become a superpower. We go from rock bottom to one of the highest points in Jewish history within 50, 60 years. What's the event that turns things around? It begins with Tfilat Chana. So Shmuel is the leader who's going to turn things around, but Shmuel's birth begins with Tfilat Chana. Tfilah, which was ironically, Eli, the existing rabbinate at the time, thought she was drunk, and we finally have a woman totally sincere in her prayer, and the high priest at the time, right, sees someone with total sincerity, and he accuses her of being drunk. You know, he doesn't get what's going on. So a total lack of understanding between the religious leadership and the people. So luckily, through Chanas Tfilah and her sincerity, leads to the birth of Shmuel. Shmuel will be, in contrast to Bnei Eli, who don't know God, they're totally corrupt in their behavior. Shmuel, God's going to punish the house of Eli. The fact they take the Aron to battle and think the Aron can save them in battle like it's some magical thing. So it deserves to be taken and Shiloh has to be destroyed. The Aron goes into captivity. Later, the Aron comes back. Again, another sad story. But all those events finally get the people to wake up, and we'll end with what Shmuel does. We're up to the parak, I think it was yesterday or today, Shmuel Aleph Parak Zayin, where Shmuel is the first shofet who actually does something right. You know, he's the first shofet who does shiput. He's the first shofet who we do in chapter 7. After the Aron was taken, 20 years pass, and the people finally start waking up that things are so bad, they start doing tshuva. And Shmuel tells the people, Im b'chol levavchem etem shavim. Don't take that partial tshuva, make it real. Get rid of put these serving other gods in your God. Get yourself ready and serve God. Serve only God. No more syncretism between your gods and Canaanite gods. And that can save you from the Plishtim. The people listen to Shmuel and he gets rid of the Avodah Zarah, but that's not enough. They have to know what they did wrong. Shmuel gathers the nation in Mitzpah. See the parallel? In Sefer Shoftim, we gather in Mitzpah to go to a civil war because everyone was a bunch of bullies. And Shmuel gathers people in Mitzpah. He prays for them there. They gather there. They do act of tshuva. They pour water symbolically. They have a fast day on that day. They admit their sins. And Shmuel is judgmental of them by Shmuel b'nei Saba Mitzpah. And we finally have a shofet doing mishpat. We finally have a shofet doing judgment, judging the people, leading them, giving them direction. And because we gathered in Mitzpah, the Plishtim think we're gathering for war, so they go to war against us. And thanks to Shmuel's help and God's help, we win that battle. And we finally have Yeshua. The Shmuel brings Yeshua in almost a backhanded way from the Plishtim. And he accomplishes same thing what Shimshon was able to accomplish in sort of a backhanded way. Shmuel was able to accomplish it in a more positive way. But this begins the recovery. We finally have a leader. I think probably one of the most important psukim was the end of Perek Gimel, which sets up the contrast after Bnei Eli died. How's the pasuk end? Vayigdal Shmuel v'Hashem haya imo. God's promise came true to Hannah. V'yidal kol Yisrael midan bad Beersheba ki neman Shmuel lenavi Hashem. We finally have a religious leader who people trust in, and all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba now. We're finally united, and we have one religious leader who the people respect. And that enables the Shekhinah to return to Shiloh, okay? Because God appeared to Shmuel in Shiloh, and God's going to be behind the scenes. And through Shmuel, we're going to begin our recovery. Shiloh will lead to Shmuel, will lead to Shmuel's birth, will lead to Shmuel's regaining the people's trust, later establishing the kingdom. And when he gets old again, his sons don't follow his ways, and therefore the people want a king. And then we get the whole story of Sefer, and we read this week of how we anoint the king and how he becomes king. We'll see. If you want something for a little bit of homework, I'll share with you something. In chapter 10, you'll read that soon this week. In chapter 10, Shmuel takes the Pach HaShemen when God shows him this person looking for his atonot is going to become the king. He anoints Shmuel, and he gives him 3 signs. Again, there'll be people. He'll find 2 people by Kever Rachel, at the border of Binyamin, and you'll find out they found your atonot. And then from there, you'll go by Elam Tavor, you'll find people on the way to Beit El. And from there, you'll get people going to the Givah, and they're going to bring you Lechem and Yain. And that'll be a sign that you're king. Take that story, these signs, and compare it to, where are we? Open up your Chumash to Torah, Breshit, Perek Lamed Hey. Remember, Shaul is going to be from the tribe of Binyamin. And in Breshit Lamed Hey, when Yaakov returns from Padan Aram, God appeared to him and blessed him and changes Yaakov's name to Yisrael, Baruch Shema Yisrael, and God tells him, pray Urveh, Kal goyim yemimeka u'malachim mechatzech yitzeu. God's promise to Yaakov that from his offspring there'll be kingdom happens here in Beit El. And the land, and right beforehand, you have the same phrase. Yaakov told the people, on the way there, they had to clean their clothes, same thing Shmuel did beforehand. And then what's God tell them? And the land I'm giving you, that I gave Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, I'm giving that to Yaakov. And then God leaves. Yaakov puts up a mitzvah, calls the place Beit El. And then right afterwards, as he's traveling from Beit El, that's where Rachel dies, and we have Kever Rachel right here. So we have Beit El, we have Kever Rachel, Rachel's birth, we have the birth of Binyamin, and we have the promise of Melachim, that from your offspring of Yaakov, from Israel, there'll be a kingship. So I think that when you compare this story to the signs that God's giving Shmuel to give Shaul, I think they relate to that story in Sefer Breshit. Okay, we'll stop here. Let me just check the last source sheet, make sure I covered everything. Okay, we have right, Shmuel again became a Kohen. We saw Zichus in Divrei Yamim. He reforms the Kuhuna. He's a Navi Ne'aman. He's established kingdom people trust. He does political leadership reform. He does educational leadership reform, mitzvah, and that explains the why it makes so much sense to read Sefer Shoftim as a book written in the time of Shmuel to explain the background of why God is establishing a kingdom, not just for political reasons, for educational reasons. And it's actually going to work because with proper religious guidance of Shmuel, we'll finally get to Malchut David and we'll get Israel back on the map and following God properly again, at least for a short amount of time. Any quick questions? I'll check in the chat. Okay. Very good. Okay, the Tilim 107 is in Nusach Sfard. Very good. Started by the Baal Shem Tov. Okay. Any quick questions?
Yeah, thank you. This is wonderful. I guess what's bothering me is we're always davening for the return of the kingdom, and right, this is what we're looking forward to. Yet the vast majority of the kings, we're not, or Shoftim, we're not like Shmuel. It's like we want, Hashiva Shoftenu, or we want Malchut Beit David.
We want Malchut David. We don't want a kingdom to be a king. We want a kingdom like Malchut Beit David. That's exactly why we pray for Etzemach David. We need a king doing Tzedek Mishpat. We'll see. That'll be next week's topic. What makes David different than Shaul? But we don't want a kingdom to be to be powerful. We want a kingdom to be able to serve God properly. Right. Until we want a kingdom for the right reason, we're not going to get a kingdom. Until Am Yisrael understands what we're supposed to do with until we understand the purpose of our political sovereignty, and of our prosperity. You'll never have quiet until we use it properly. That's what all the Tochachot say. So we pray for return, but now that we're returning, what do we do with that return? The goal isn't just living here. The goal is being a nation representing God here. That needs good educational leadership, religious leadership, proper political leaders. And stage number one is being, it's this recovery, having, setting up a country. But you do with your country. That's why there's so much to learn from Sefer Shoftim. The idea that people in the name of God are willing to go to war and do terrible, like killing other Jews and things like that, all in the name of God, it's a typical lack of proper education. And each side is trying to do the right thing. Is how could such a thing be in Israel? And the type of how you build a Beit Elohim, who you hired to be your rabbi in your little shtibel there, and how one group, they want to have a shul, but they steal it with them. If it wasn't so true to life, you think it was a made up story. But it's so typical of human behavior when you don't have proper education. Yeah. That's why we need Sefer Shoftim L'Dorot more than anything else.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good week, everybody. And next week I'm gonna give a shir on why we have Sefer Shmuel as a whole. One last question from Nathan: why did Pinchas' family get a hold to the land at the end of Yeshua? No, the Kohanim need a place to live. The Kohanim Shevet Levi, they don't have their own nachala, but in every shevet they get cities to live in. They need a place to live. They can even grow their own food, but it's not their nachala in the realm of, in the sense of, the other tribes have that with land rights in Yova, but each tribe has to give Shevet Levi a place to live. But I don't think the Kohanim didn't come really that powerful from land ownership. The idea of Shemitah laws or Yova laws is that no one can amass land ownership forever. That's what happened in Europe with the serfs and the nobles. There were the landowners, and they had all the money and the food, and you were either born in nobility or you were a serf, and you had and you could never get out of it until people rebelled. Okay. Anyway, everyone have a good week, and keep reading, as they say. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Tov.